Good afternoon. I'm honored to be here with you today. My name is Tania Salgado, an architect representing as Vice President of the North Region of FPAA, the Pan American Federation of Architects Associations. Thank you for the participation from each of the countries that make up the North region of FPAA. This region includes the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada, RAIC, the American Institute of Architects, AIA of the United States, and the Federación de Colegios de Arquitectos of the Mexican Republic, FACARB. Today's theme is focused on public politics and how our associations have influenced government and public policy for improvements in our profession, our environments, and for society. We know that architecture affects people and community, and the work of architects is essential to human well-being. Society benefits from engaged architects and associations like ours. It is key for architects to use their knowledge, skill, and experience to engage in civic life and public policy to promote livable, healthy, sustainable, and quality environments for today's and future generations. Our associations support our members and partners in our industry to develop and engage in best practices. We support programs that promote good design and construction, including research and development of materials, technologies, and practices that advance the needs of clients and the public in order to improve our environment and protect the health and safety of the public. So to kick us off, I would like to introduce Derek Washen. He is the Director of International Affairs for the American Institute of Architects, who will introduce our first speaker. Derek is an international relations specialist with experience in architecture and energy industries, research and strategy. He is responsible for implementing several initiatives focused on international relations and global practice for the AIA.
Tanya, thank you for the kind introduction and for your and FPAA's work in organizing this webinar. Today, it is my pleasure to introduce both my colleague and a glimpse of the work of the American Institute of Architects on public policy. The American Institute of Architects was founded in 1857 by 13 architects and today counts 94,000 members. We advocate for the value of architecture and give architects the resources they need to do their best work. Our work is to drive positive change through the power of design. A central element of how AIA drives this positive change is through engaging with government and public policy, which has led our organization to be located here in Washington, D.C. AIA is the voice of architecture to legislators at the federal, state, and municipal levels, as well as internationally. Through our engagement with leaders, we promote meaningful policies to enable architects to build better buildings that will sustain a healthy country. My colleague, Kara Kempski, will share key insights into the U.S. federal policy and ways that AIA has engaged to ensure that architects are represented. Kara is the Director of Federal Relations at the American Institute of Architects. She leads the organization's lobbying efforts before the United States Congress and the executive branch. As part of the work, Kara analyzes federal policies that impact the profession of architecture. Her portfolio includes climate action, resilient infrastructure, affordable housing, economic recovery, and education. Before joining AIA in 2018, Kara worked for nearly 5 years at the Council for a Strong America, a membership organization that advocates for child abuse prevention and juvenile justice reform. She graduated from Gettysburg College with a BA in history and the University of Tennessee with a master's in American history. With no further ado, I welcome Kara Kempski.
Thanks so much, Derek, and thank you all for the opportunity to speak with you today. I was very excited to be invited to be part of this. As Derek mentioned, my name is Kara Kempski, and I'm the Director of Federal Relations here at AIA National. So just wanted to note that the overview I'm giving today is focused entirely on United States federal policy, advocacy, and the policies that we are championing. But there's a lot more happening at AIA at the state, local, and international level. So this is just a subset of our work. So I'll share my screen now and focus today on really 2 policy campaigns that we've engaged in this Congress that have resulted in 3 major pieces of legislation. So first, AIA's Buildings, Art, and Infrastructure Initiative is one that's been a really key focus for a few years now at the AIA. And the reason for that is for American federal policymakers for a long time, they have viewed infrastructure strictly in terms of horizontal structures, so roads, bridges, and that kind of thing. But the building sector hasn't been included in any significant way in the past. And that's something that we felt really needed to change for a few reasons. First and foremost, looking at it from a climate perspective, we know that the building sector in the United States contributes roughly 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions. We also know that many of our buildings are at high risk for natural disasters, and that's only going to get worse as storms become more frequent and more severe. We also recognize that a lot of the communities that will face the brunt of severe storms and pollution are often also the ones who have been historically disinvested. And so while we are all likely to suffer from climate change and its effects, we're not going to suffer equally. And so we need to address that head on while there's still time to make progress. And finally, we thought it was really important work for the entire architecture, engineering, and contracting community. There are a lot of projects that we know out in the communities need investment. And while Congress was thinking about infrastructure, we wanted to make sure that buildings were part of that. One of the things our members often say is that if you're driving on a road or across a bridge, you're probably going from one building to another. So those should be included as well. And we found back in 2016 in a survey that a lot of Americans agreed with us. Public sentiment really supported the fact that public buildings are as important as other more traditional infrastructure projects in the way that the community thinks about their own investment and what they consider to be infrastructure. The challenge, though, is that, as I mentioned before, the United States Congress historically has not seen it that way. And so we had a lot of precedent to overcome in the way that they structure these pieces of legislation and what's included in them. So that's where this campaign came in. And so architects from across the country took action. We had a big lobby day right at the start of this last Congress, which was last year in 2021 through this year in 2022. So to really kick things off, early in 2021, we had over 600 members come to meet with their members of Congress virtually, since we were still in COVID lockdown at that point, and engaged with over 370 congressional offices in just that one event alone. For the United States Congress, there is 535 offices total between the House and the Senate. And so it's a pretty good proportion of folks that they were able to reach just on that one day. We also did a series of action alerts and have followed up with congressional staff meetings at the staff level, my team and myself, to really drive this home and reiterate why buildings should be included in any infrastructure spending. And so I'm happy to report that we were successful in this effort. And it could not have happened without all of the architects who weighed in, many of them more than once, with their elected representatives. And so this campaign resulted in two signature pieces of legislation. The first was the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which I'll talk about first. And then the second was the Inflation Reduction Act. So IIJA, or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, was bipartisan, and it included over $1.2 trillion in total funding. So a lot of that did go to support horizontal infrastructure, which was also critically needed here in the United States. Our roads and bridges desperately needed attention. And so we were very supportive of that. And for the first time, this package included significant funding for the building sector as well. So that establishes a precedent for us to build on in the future, and it'll start to get projects in the pipeline that have been really needed for a long time. So now that this bill is passed and signed into law, where that leaves us is working with our members to make sure that they know about any important deadlines that are coming up. And there are a few that I'll note. So we've been doing a series of webinars like this one with our members and with our component executives from across the country who work in our state and local offices to get the word out. And so then they can work with their local elected officials and their state elected officials to put in applications where necessary to receive now some of this federal funding. As you'll see on the screen there, there's a mix within this bill of some formula grants, which are based on population. And so that money will definitely go to wherever the formula says it must go. but there's also plenty of competitive grants. And so the federal agencies will evaluate different applications against each other for a limited set of resources. So those are the deadlines that we've been highlighting. And there's just a few here I wanted to note. For the cost-effective code implementation grants, so it's $225 million from the federal government to support state and local governments in adopting and implementing updated building energy codes. That's a big issue that a lot of our members and components work on here at the AIA to really encourage state and local governments to adopt the latest codes. That is really where the rubber meets the road in a lot of cases for improving building energy policy. And so these federal grants can help with that. But as I mentioned, these are competitive grants, and so you do need to apply to receive them. Those applications are expected to open before the end of this calendar year. A separate competitive grant is the Building Resilient Infrastructures and Communities Grant. That's run through FEMA here in the United States, and it's $2 billion. And those applications are opening tomorrow. So we've been doing these for the last couple of weeks to help make sure that folks are prepared for that application process. And there are a lot of different opportunities for funding. You can see at the bottom of the screen there, funding for capability, capacity building, mitigation, overhead expenses. So a lot of discretion that states can put into their applications when they're putting them together. But ultimately, those applications are evaluated on a point system, and there's a priority for those states who have adopted statewide building codes. So potentially these two grants could work together in a state that has not yet adopted a statewide building energy code. You may want to use the cost-effective code implementation grants to support adopting a statewide code that then would help your application for BRIC grants. That's the local advocacy and state advocacy that a lot of our colleagues are engaged in now to try to make use of these resources that the federal government has provided. And then finally, there's an additional $500 million in the IIJA for energy efficiency and renewable energy in schools. And again, a lot of discretion is left up to the applicants on what they want to use that on. Could be envelope improvements to the building, could be HVAC systems. There's a wide variety. But basically, if you are able to either install renewable energy in the school or to just improve the overall energy footprint, these grants can help with that. So that takes us to the second bill that passed in August of this year, the Inflation Reduction Act. This one was passed in a different format. I mentioned that the IIJA passed with bipartisan support in both the chambers of Congress, the House and the Senate. The Inflation Reduction Act was different. It passed through a process known as budget reconciliation, which means that you can pass the Senate with only 50 votes as opposed to getting the normal 60 to overcome a filibuster. And so on the one hand, it's a beneficial process which both parties have used to pass signature pieces of legislation. The flip side of it, though, is that it's more complicated as a legislative process, and there are a lot more strings attached to it. But ultimately, they were able to get this bill across the finish line. And if it's taken up in the way that it's projected, and when folks use the grants and the tax incentives that are in this bill, it's estimated to cut greenhouse gas emissions in the United States by 40% in 2030. That is a huge step forward, and it is the reason that AIA has supported the energy and climate provisions within this bill. We know that there's still more to do on top of that, but that gets us much closer to where we know we need to be by 2030 and 2040 to meet our climate goals. And so there's a lot more climate and energy provisions than I'll cover today, but just a few that I wanted to highlight. So 2 new grant programs have been created as part of this to support building energy code adoption. So similar to the IIJA, it recognizes that building energy codes are a key part in making sure that our building sector ultimately reduces its greenhouse gas emissions and in many ways also becomes more resilient. These are separate grant programs, though, from the one I mentioned earlier. So the IIJA grant program will continue to operate independently and on its own. And for that one, any improvement over your current building energy code is a positive. You could use the grant to support that. For these, you have to meet a higher bar. So for the $330 million grants, $330 million total that will be then granted out, the state or local government needs to develop a plan and implement that plan to meet or exceed the 2021 IECC or ASHRAE 90.1 2019 standard. So you need to get up to the current expectation for energy codes. In addition to that, there's $670 million to adopt or implement zero energy stretch codes that go beyond that. So basically, in these two bills, the federal government here in the United States has now provided 3 different incentives to improve your building energy code. There's one pot of funding that'll help you improve over wherever you're at now to any level of improvement you could qualify for. Then there's another pot of funding to get all the way up to 2021, and then a third pot of funding to go beyond that. We are really excited about what these multiple incentives are going to do to support state and local efforts to adopt the latest and greatest energy codes. And so this is also not only was it a top priority for AIA at the federal level, it is a key priority for our state and local components as they work with their state and local governments to take advantage of these incentives. Next, just to note, there's roughly $9.5 billion for energy efficient and electric homes. And that's broken mostly between 2 rebate programs. One that's $4.3 billion for whole house energy savings. And then a second that's also roughly $4.3 billion to establish a rebate program for electrification projects. Third, the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development has $1 billion within this bill that they can use in a combination of grants and loans to eligible affordable housing units. I mentioned that budget reconciliation, which the process by which this bill passed, comes with some strings attached. One of the ways you see that show up is actually within these programs, particularly that last one I mentioned, the $1 billion for HUD. There's not a lot of detail in the way that this is going to be rolled out. So there's going to be a lot of opportunity for HUD as the federal agency to figure out what this looks like. And so that's also an opportunity for our advocacy to continue and working with our architects who work specifically on affordable housing development to weigh in and try to make sure that these resources go where they're most needed. There have also been significant changes to the tax code as part of this legislation. And so just to note that prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements are now tied to many of the tax incentives that deal with the building sector. But there's also been a real focus on trying to encourage these tax incentives to be used for retrofits and not just new construction. And so they've developed whole new pathways for architects, engineers, contractors to demonstrate energy use intensity improvements that'll make it a little bit easier to encourage building owners of existing buildings to also take advantage of these incentives. And then finally, just to note that there is significant funding in multiple places in this legislation to support lower carbon materials. And some of that's on the acquisition and installation of low embodied materials in federal buildings. Some of it is standardizing the environmental product definition, EPDs, and making it a little bit easier to decipher. But it shows up in multiple places. And I think it's going to be an important part, again, for the entire construction community to be helping the federal agencies as they figure out what they are going to prioritize within that funding. So finally, shifting gears from our infrastructure work, there's one other bill I wanted to bring to your attention that AIA has been very involved in over the last couple of years, and that's the Democracy in Design Act. So this started in response to what would become Executive Order 13967. And so there were 2 versions of this. First was the draft that was circulated in February of 2020. that is where, you know, the AIA and some others here in the United States, others in the design community, first caught wind of this idea. Ultimately, it was executed in December of 2020, and that final EO, which did have some changes from the draft, the final was entitled Promoting Beautiful Federal Civic Architecture, which sounds benign at the title, but when you dig into it, AIA was very concerned with the intent behind this executive order, which would have established classical architecture as the preferred design style for all federal buildings over $50 million, which in practice would have been just about all of them. It also established a council, changed the 1962 guiding principles, which have never carried the force of law here in the United States, but were really used as a touch point. And what those guiding principles had said, in part, was that there should be no national design style for architecture, that there are multiple architectural styles that have originated in the United States, have evolved in the United States, and that evolution should be allowed to continue. And design trends should flow from the design community to the government, not the other way around. So we were really concerned with the premise that one design style could be favored. The draft also disfavored particular design styles, particularly brutalism and postmodernism. And we also oppose any attempts to ban or limit the use of architectural design styles. And basically it's because in AIA's perspective, no design style is inherently more or less valuable than any other. Any of them can be appropriate in any particular context, and that should be the design process working with the client, the stakeholders who are actually going to use the building. They should have a say in what they want, and not have that sort of dictated at the outset, irrespective of their concerns or the regional traditions of the area. So we pushed back on the draft, and ultimately when the executive order was issued. Over 11,000 AIA members took action and sent letters to the White House opposing the executive order. We were joined by multiple other organizations within the design community and are very grateful for their advocacy on this issue as well. And we sent, a number of letters. We had multiple meetings with the Trump administration, urging them not to move forward with the executive order. Unfortunately, after the election, when that executive order was finally issued, we recognized that then we needed to redouble those efforts. And so we met with Biden administration transition officials in that period as well to bring this issue to their attention, and worked with members of Congress to send a letter to the Biden team alerting them to this and asking them to revoke this executive order within the first 100 days, which is really more of a symbolic timeline than anything else. But we thought that symbolism was important, that this be revoked as soon as possible before it affected projects that were in the pipeline. And so on that front, we were successful. The executive order was revoked, and we're very grateful to that. So it no longer is impacting any projects that are ongoing. However, we recognize that now that it has happened, it could happen again. Precedent is really important in federal policy here in the United States. And so now that this precedent exists, we need to be really mindful that a future administration could pick any other design style that they prefer and hold that up to the detriment of others. And we want to prevent that. We also really want to depoliticize architectural design. We don't want that to be a political football. It's something that we think should be project specific, should be sensitive and responsive to the folks who are actually using the building, and not something that is engaged with in any other way. And so that's where the Democracy in Design Act comes in. It's a bipartisan bill led by Congresswoman Titus of Nevada and Congressman Simpson of Idaho. And it's grown in support. It's now got 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. And this bill would do a couple of really important things. First of all, it would prevent the establishment of a preferred or a banned architectural style at the federal level. It would also require that the process by which federal buildings are acquired and commissioned it has a little bit more transparency. But the challenge that we're running into is that given the scope of some of the other pieces of legislation that Congress has dealt with in the last 2 years, this one is a lot smaller in terms of its reach. You know, I'm in the Inflation Reduction Act or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. You know, we're talking about pretty significant portions of the American economy were impacted by both of those. And those were just two. There are multiple other major legislation that's passed in the last 2 years. And so making sure that this one doesn't get put on the back burner or overlooked by other members of Congress has been a real focus of ours, and it's going to need to continue to be a key priority for us. So part of what we've done is for our lobby day this year, instead of focusing on infrastructure as we did in 2021, as I mentioned, this year's lobby day was focused on affordable housing and the Democracy in Design Act. And so we had a hybrid format since the United States Capitol was still partially open, partially closed at that point. So we had some members meet with their members of Congress in person and some virtually based on their preference. But we worked with our team here to put together a petition that was also signed by a couple thousand architects to send up to members of Congress, really explaining why this policy matters to us and why we urge their support. That work is ongoing. You can see here some of the photos from that day, some in person and some virtual. But I think that was an important step to raise the profile of this issue that we need to continue to build on. So that will be a key priority of ours until we see that bill all the way across the finish line. But with that, just wanted to say thank you all so much again for inviting me to participate in this. I would love to talk more if folks have any questions or want to collaborate in the future. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And I'll turn it back over to you, Derek.
Thank you for that insightful presentation. You clearly illustrated the power that architects and associations like our own can have when we come together to advocate for public policies that enhance the built environment. We really appreciate all the insight that you provided. Thank you so much. And thank you to FPAA, and thank you to Vice President Tania for hosting us.
Thank you both, Derek and Kara. Your presentation demonstrates the influence the Institute has on government and the difference we can make for our profession and our environments. Thank you to the AIA. Next, I would like to present the Federación de Colegios de Arquitectos of the Mexican Republic. President Architect Marco Vergara, who will present our next speaker.
Hi, hello everybody. My name is Marco Vergara. I'm president of the Mexican Federation of Architects Association, and I'm here talking with Arquitecto José Rodulfo Muñoz Villers, who is the leader who won the last architectural competition that FECARM did last May. This competition is something not new in Mexico, but not usual, because here in Mexico, the public projects are based on the public works law, and it's very difficult for the government to make architectural competition based in quality. Currently, the winner only wins by price, the lowest bidding process. So because there's a gap between the lowest bidder and the better project, is the reason why FECARM, with the support of the municipality of Celaya, made this competition so we can assure the government that have several projects, and we have an excellent jury that select the best one.
The city of Celaya, Guanajuato, through its Housing Institute, has made an excellent synergy with the Federation of College of Architects from Mexico, holding the Affordable Housing Contest, where FECARM has been a link and manager between designers, government agencies, and specialists. For us as a city, this is a case of absolute success, obtaining a project of great architectural and technical quality. The city has won a great proposal in a very short time, becoming a legal instrument or model which has streamlined the administrative, projective, and economic process to start the work, obtaining a prototype of housing and of collaboration between an organized society at the federal level and the municipal government.
So the project that won the contest was the one that Arquitecto Jose Rodulfo won, and that this way the municipality acquired a project based in quality so to fill the gap between the public work laws and the competition. So Jose, tell us a little about your experience in this competition or another, if you can.
For sure. First of all, I would like to thank President Marco Vergara for this fantastic invitation to be speaking with you all. As Marco already said, a couple of months ago, the Federation, the Mexican Federation of Architects, launched this competition for social housing in Celaya. Basically, my work is focused both in commissions and also in invited or open competitions, either nationally or internationally. So as soon as we had the chance to take a look at this opportunity to participate in this competition, we started to amalgamate a group of very young professionals. So what we did basically was to read and go through the brief very carefully. We also took a look at the jury that was, basically led by the president of the United International Architects and also a couple of very well-known Spanish and Mexican architects. So the project, as I already said, I believe it was about social housing, and it was extremely interesting because I believe that housing itself, it's a very compelling topic of research in terms of urbanism and architecture. So we work, I believe, very intelligently, and at the very end, we wanted to deliver a project that was progressive, but also buildable. Of course, if Marco in a different platform allows us to present the project to you, that would be fantastic. But at the very end, we have this fantastic opportunity to win the competition. And we are now in the stage of delivering the design, development, and construction documents in order to basically build the project in the next couple of months.
Okay, Jose, tell us about, do you have any experience in other competitions here in Mexico?
Yes, I was actually previously talking and sharing with Marco that I am very interested in competitions. And in 2013, almost 10 years ago, the Mexico City government launched this competition to renew a very large section of downtown Mexico City. This a market called La Merced, which used to be the largest market in all Latin America. And the project was very challenging because it wasn't just about architecture and urbanism, it also was about social structures and a lot of dynamics and commercial dynamics that happens every day in this section of downtown Mexico City. And once again, we decided to invite a lot of very smart professionals from the fields of urbanism, public politics, and landscape design, industrial design, and architects as well. And at the end, we ended up proposing a project that was selected as the first prize. And it took almost a year to develop like a series of strategies and to be implemented by the government. Unfortunately, after we ended up the project, it came change in the political leaders of the city, and our project just ended up on hold. And that's the story of that intervention in La Merced, downtown Mexico City.
As we can see, open competition here in Mexico are unusual. Normally, the governments make restricted invitations, biddings, and I hope this example of the competition for minimal cost housing in Celaya can open the doors and show other governments, local and state holders, that it's a good thing to have open competition in architecture so they can acquire very quality projects. What do you think, Jose?
I agree entirely with you, Marco, and I would like to thank you once again for this fantastic opportunity and for the audience to allow us to share our ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marco. It is clear here the influences the association can make to governmental processes that can improve the quality of the built environment, particularly for the people who live in it. Thank you to FACAR. Michael Brennan is the Chief Executive Officer of the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada. He is responsible for the success of the Institute and has built long-term relationships with key stakeholders and partners to enhance the value delivered to RAIC members. Mike will introduce our final presentation for the North region of FAPA.
Thank you so very much, Tania. I would like to first start with a land acknowledgement. I am both happy and honored to be joining you from the traditional and unceded territories of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples of Ottawa, which I work, live, and play. The final presentation will be focused on introducing a project of which the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada is so very proud to be a partner of, along with many other stakeholders in equality in Canada's built environment. Roadmaps to Equity, Social Value and Sustainability. A Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada partnership is a great opportunity to bring the architectural community together to research and discuss quality in Canada's built environment. This research partnership introduction is presented by Jean-Pierre Chupín, Social Sciences Humanities Research Council of Canada, Partnership Director from the University of Montreal, along with 5 crucial members of the steering committee: Josie C. Auger from Athabasca University, Carmela Cucuzzella from Concordia University, Terrance Galvin from Laurentian University, Brian Robert Sinclair from the University of Calgary, and Mr. Rob Wright from the University of Toronto. You may access this last presentation by clicking the link found in the video description box below. Thank you and have a wonderful day or evening.